Well, if you sit at the table of success too long, you get fat and bored. So I can tell you. It's like, I always say to people, think about something you achieved, you worked your tail off and achieved, and you were excited about. And then what happened? Well, some people say, well, then I thought, is this all there is? Or other people go, no, I really loved it. It was phenomenal. I said, for how long? For how long were you excited about that? You achieved this great goal. Were you excited for 5 years? Were you lifted by it for a year, 6 months, 6 weeks, 6 days, 6 hours? Most people somewhere between 6 hours and 6 weeks. And I said, the reason is because we're made to grow. It doesn't matter how much money you make. Advisors are sitting on an amazing opportunity. They've had the winds at their back for the longest bull market in human history. I mean, this has been insane, right?
Yep.
So it's going to change at some point, and we got to be ready for that change. And when that change happens, you got to be strong. And what makes you strong is, like, you look at the history of the world. Good times makes weak people. Weak people create bad times. Bad times create strong people. Strong people create great times. If you don't want to be one of the masses that goes through that cycle, you've got to make sure you keep hungry.
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners.
Today, I'm honored to have a dear friend who also happens to be one of the most influential leaders in business strategy, personal development, and achievement, the one and only Tony Robbins. As a best-selling author, world-renowned life and business strategist, and an incredible philanthropist, Tony has helped over 100 million people across 195 countries through his seminars, coaching, and multiple programs. From working with top CEOs, elite athletes, to everyday individuals like you and me, he has dedicated his life to helping others achieve peak performance and lasting success. Tony, my friend, I'm glad we were finally able to make this happen. Welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the introduction, except that you're not some ordinary person, Cody. Come on. What you built over the last 20 years with your team is truly second to none. Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You've been a big part of that. I know we have somewhat limited time today. We could talk for literally probably days about all the things that you've helped us with, I think, through the years too. And I want to jump into some of those. I know you've been a huge influence on me and our business, and more so on a lot of our advisors too. So we're going to cover a lot of different topics. You want to jump in, or you got anything you want to say before we get to it?
Let's jump in.
Okay. Well, let's start with business. I think that's you and I first connected. I remember coming out to Business Mastery when you were working on your book, Money Master the Game.
Yeah.
I've been to Business Mastery probably, 6, 7, 8 times. I'll start here. You've spoken with thousands of business leaders over the past 4 years, where I would say we saw more fear, uncertainty, and in a lot of ways upheaval than any other 4-year period. Yeah. Those leaders that you've seen just grow and thrive, how did they approach those past 4 years, just the uncertainty and disruption? And then what can we learn from the way they approach the business?
I think the best leaders that I know of are people that have an understanding of what season they're in. So you do the right thing at the wrong time. You plant in the winter. I don't care how hard you work, you're not going to win.
Yeah.
You have to understand the environment you're in. And then you have to have a vision beyond that to guide you. And then you have to have enough, drive and hunger to take immediate action, because people under fear usually become indecisive. The decisive leaders are the ones who do it. So what makes you a leader? It's your ability to produce results. What gets you to produce results? You solve problems. And so what happens for these types of leaders, I see them, they thrive during crisis. It's almost trite to say, but it's true. Crisis always creates opportunity. And so if you look at, I give you 3 simple things that they all do in common, really simple, overly simplified, but universally or so. Everyone that I saw that did well during these last 4 years, they saw things as they were. They didn't BS themselves. They didn't try to say it was better than it was, but they also didn't make it worse than it was. Because most people, out of fear, make things worse than it is, because they're afraid of failing. They want a reason why. And so it's the economy, it's the environment, it's COVID, it's the shutdowns. But these people didn't accept that. They said, yes, this is real, and it's not as bad as you're seeing. It's not going to be forever. They all know, like any season, winter doesn't last forever. There's no war that lasts forever. There is no COVID that lasts forever, no pandemic, no economy lasts forever. Everything changes, right? And so those people see it as is, but they don't see it worse than it is. Then the second thing they do is they all see it better than it is. In other words, they figure out the opportunity in the crisis. And then the third thing is they make it the way they see it. So I'll give you a good example. Ken Griffin at Citadel. Okay, so all hell breaks loose. He's living in Chicago. Chicago, literally what pushed him finally over the edge, he told me he moved his entire company in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the pandemic, about a mile from my house here at the Four Seasons here. And he literally took over the Four Seasons. He made a bubble like the NBA. His people live there. He brought in more power than you'll see on most portions of the East Coast so he could function at the highest level. And Citadel just exploded forward. And he said, this is an opportunity to reset. He told me that, what pushed him over the edge was 2 of his own people had their cars jacked right in front of his own building. And he's trying to recruit people, and they're saying, how safe is it? And he's like, this is our opportunity to change everything. He moved here. He's building $1 billion home about 2 miles from my house here. Literally, it's $1 billion.
Didn't he like tear down 3 or 4 or something? I think.
Yeah, he took down 3 of them. He's already got, I think, 700 million just in the land. But the reason I pointed out is he lives this opportunity situation. And I was Mark Benioff's a good friend from Salesforce. I've been working with him since Salesforce began. He came to my programs out, so I decided to start it. And he invited me to come to this Fortune 200 CEO conference. And you weren't allowed to bring your secretaries or assistants, but I was allowed to come. And there was an interesting moment there because, I got a chance to visit with Ken again. And then he was interviewed by this woman from CNBC. And she was saying, well, I'm curious, how many days a week do people come to work at Citadel? And he looked at her and said, obviously never less than 5, most 6. And the room, which is all CEOs, top 200 Fortune 500 CEOs, right? Fortune CEOs, there's this kind of ooh and ah in the room. And she goes, well, you can't do that. He goes, what do you mean you can't do that? She said, well, how are you getting people to do that? And he goes, how are you getting people? You can't recruit people that way. He goes, you know what we do? We go to colleges and we look at kids and say, if you're stupid, go to the guy with a t-shirt that says, come to work 3 days a week. You're going to be in your pajamas. You're going to be a master of this business and you're going to have a career. It's never going to happen. If that's the kind of person you are, we have no interest in you. He said, we had 45,000 applicants for 1,100 positions. He said, we have no problem whatsoever. And then she asked the audience, how many of you have people coming 5 days a week? I couldn't believe it, Cody. It was less than 15% of the room. 85% were there. And they all oohed and awed, and they said, you guys, he said to them, you guys need to have some guts here. You need to take some risks. And he started painting a picture to them about this isn't going to be forever, but this is what you got to do. So I'll give you my own example. In our business, I'm in a business where we do stadiums basically, right? 15, 20,000 people all around the world. And I get a phone call, in March of 2020 from the governor in California saying, oh, your San Francisco event, 14,000 people, you can only put 100 people in that place, in the stadium. And I'm like, are you crazy? We can't do that. He goes, well, that's the rules now. So it's like my mindset, it's the same mindset as everybody else. Okay, there's an opportunity here. Here's what we're going to do. We're moving to Vegas. They'll never shut down Vegas. That's what I thought. We moved 14,000 people, Cody, if you can imagine this, 2 weeks later to go to Vegas. And 7 days before we got there, they shut down Vegas.
Wow.
So I was like, okay, we got to serve these people. They need us. Okay, we'll go to Texas. Texas is its own country, right? Yep. The governor there, he said, I'm never shutting down. A week and a half before Texas, I rented a friend of mine has a giant church there, 14,000 people. He shut down Texas. There's like, we're going to go to movie theaters. And this is what you do when you're solving problems, right? We'll go to 1,400 movie theaters. We can put 10 people in each one. It'll be local for them, have a big screen, great sound, at least have some human interaction. They shut down the movie theater. So I built a studio that has 50-foot high ceilings, 20-foot LED screens, 0.67, highest resolution in the world, 50 feet around. I went to the founder of Zoom, Eric is a good friend of mine, and he came by and he said, I need more than 1,000 people. I need 25,000 people. Then we built software so that people could shake their phone instead of clapping, and it sends an electrical signal. If one person does it, you don't hear it, but when 20,000 people do it, it's like thunder. That process that we did allowed us to serve people around the world because all of a sudden every country shut down.
Yep.
We helped people when they needed it most, and our seminars grew from 10, 15,000, sometimes 20,000 people to the biggest ones now. We've been multiple ones, over 1 million people for 4 days.
That's crazy.
So there's an opportunity always in the middle of it. It isn't just being positive. That's what you got to look for. And if you look at the Fortune 1000, biggest companies in the world, 65% of them were formed in a wintertime, a financial winter. It means a recession or a depression. Not springtime where everybody grows and it's easy and everybody's optimistic. Not summer when it's a little tough. Not fall when people want to give you a mortgage and you because you have a pulse, right? We're talking about the tough times. So if you do well in this season as an advisor, you're going to do well for the rest of your life. And you guys have proven that. I mean, look what you did with your core business. when interest rates kept going. I mean, it would be the worst business to be in. And look at what you guys built.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable what you built. And now you've got both sides of the table. It's fantastic, Cody. I really have so much respect for you guys.
I appreciate that. I think maybe I'll transition out of that because I saw, the people who really figured out how to adjust during that have thrived. I say all the time, I think we work with the best group of financial advisors in the country who happen to be great business owners. But I think what they've seen, even to this point, like this last year, maybe the last few years, their business is at a point where a lot of them, I don't think, ever even envisioned it being. So I'm going to transition the question a little. What would you say to a group like that you want to recognize the success you've had, but now how do you reset like what is possible for the business when you've hit this high level? And then I think the other big question there that I'm always on them about is like, how do you avoid complacency? How do you realize that like there's a lot more available and you don't want to like stall out or stop there?
Well, if you sit at the table of success too long, you get fat and bored. So I can tell you. It's like, I always say to people, think about something you achieved. You worked your tail off and achieved, and you were excited about. And then what happened? Well, some people say, well, then I thought, is this all there is? Or other people go, no, I really loved it. It was phenomenal. I said, for how long? For how long were you excited about that? You achieved this great goal. Were you excited for 5 years? Were you lifted by it for a year? 6 months? 6 weeks? 6 days? 6 hours? Most people somewhere between 6 hours and 6 weeks. And I said, the reason is because we're made to grow. It doesn't matter how much money you make. Advisors are sitting on an amazing opportunity. They've had the winds at their back for the longest bull market in human history. I mean, this has been insane, right?
Yep.
So it's going to change at some point, and we got to be ready for that change. And when that change happens, you got to be strong. And what makes you strong is like you look at the history of the world. Good times makes weak people. Weak people create bad times. Bad times create strong people. Strong people create great times. If you don't want to be one of the masses that goes through that cycle, you've got to make sure you keep hungry. And if you look at the most successful people I know in the world, if you look at, Mark Benioff, right? Salesforce, or Richard Branson, or Sarah Blakely, who, built her entire women's empire, or Oprah, all these people have something in common. They're very smart people. And don't get me wrong, I love wickedly smart people. But there are a lot of smart people that don't fight their way out of a paper bag in business. What they have in common more than anything else, the one ingredient is hunger. A hunger to grow, a hunger to expand, a hunger not like, okay, I'm going to get to this goal and now I've made it. I mean, you and I don't have to work another day of our lives. I haven't had to for 15 years. I work harder now than I ever have because it's so fulfilling. Because if you ask people what makes people happy, what really makes them happy, there's only one word: progress. If you're not growing, you feel like you're dying at some point. We've all seen people, a billionaire or a famous actress or a comedian, and they take their own lives because they grew to a certain point and then they just got stale. They stopped growing. They usually got into drugs or alcohol, and then all of a sudden the life doesn't have any meaning anymore. So my invitation to everybody is think about business as a spiritual game. A spiritual game. Every religion on the planet has some version of love thy neighbor like thyself, right? It's like if you can fall in love with your client, if you can fall in love with something beyond yourself, you will have unending energy. That's what I experienced, and I know you do too. I've witnessed it with you over the decades. It's like you've got a purpose, you've got a meaning. It could be your kids, it could be something in your community, it could be your business, it could be a foundation. But finding something you care about more than yourself gives you a level of energy and focus and drive that's amazing. And I got to be honest with you, I got to the point, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, where it's like, okay, I've helped millions of people. I've worked in 195 countries, every country in the world. I've been everywhere, I've seen everything. It's like, what's going to excite me at this point? And, I got all the toys and things that people want, and I certainly appreciate those things, but that never really drove me. And I was like, I need to have some really big philanthropic goals that make me want to work harder to take care of them. So the first one I did is I got fed when I was 11 years old. We had no money and no food, and it hit me hard because it made me believe strangers care. It's why I'm here. And so I said, I'm going to feed 2 families, right? But when I'm older, when I was 17, I fed 2, and then 4, and then 8, and then 1 million people a year, and then 2 million. And then 10 years ago, I was writing Money Master the Game a little bit in that time, and I'm interviewing all these self-made billionaires. Nobody from the Lucky Sperm Club, luckily. They all did it from scratch, Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, Warren Buffett, Paul Tudor Jones, all these guys. And while I'm reading it, I saw Congress cut food stamps, it's now called the SNAP program, by $6 billion. It means every family needs food would have to give up a week's worth of food unless people like you and I stepped in. So I called my foundation and said, how many people we fed in my lifetime? I didn't know the number. And they said, it's 47 million people. I was like, oh my God, that excited me. But then I thought, well, what if I fed as many people in 1 year as I've done in my entire life, fed 50 million people in a year, 50 million meals? And then I thought, what if I did 100 million? And then I went, what if I did 100 million for 10 years and provided 1 billion meals? That was like, your goals affect you. If you don't have goals, if you just go to your goal and you achieve it, if you don't set something new, it's not the purpose of the goal is not to get the goal, it's what it makes of you. And when you got a goal that inspires you, and all of a sudden, I'm going to feed 1 billion meals, and I did it in 8 years. And now I'm doing a 100 billion meal challenge. I'm going to the UN. I'm announcing it in the 68,000 person concert for global citizen on Saturday. We've already, I want to announce it here, I got to keep it there, but we've already done a huge number of those 100 billion meals, way more than anybody thought was possible, because the world needs it. So find something that you care about more than yourself. My wife and I have rescued 71,000 children from trafficking. I've made movies on trafficking. You know, I don't know if you saw Sound of Freedom, or I now have City of Dreams that I just put out in the last couple of weeks. But it's like, find that and you won't get stale. And then what's most important is you'll feel so freaking alive. And that's what we want. Not, okay, I'm okay, I'm just going to play golf. I mean, it's okay if that's what you want to do. And there's nothing wrong with playing golf. But if you want a life that's meaningful, it has to be about something more than yourself.
That's great. I remember being there when you issued that kind of challenge with Feeding America. So to see you accomplish that, and now to hear 100 billion is crazy. And we'll air after you've announced that, so we won't leak it.
Okay,
good. So we'll be good. You know, maybe a quick follow up, and then I want to transition to talking about health a little. But back to that purpose. One of the things I say all the time is I think being an advisor and doing that job well is one of the most noble professions. You get to sit with clients during some of the best times. Unfortunately, you also have to sit with them through some of the worst times, loss of a spouse or parent or some of that. Yeah. I've watched you at some of your events counsel people through some really challenging times. Just any advice you would have for our advisors as they have to, you know, sit with someone. How do you rise to that occasion and help someone navigate those low points?
I think, I mean, you know, there's no replacement for real compassion, right? You know, it's easy if you get overexposed to something to trying to protect yourself. Like some doctors do this and they don't have the same emotional connection because they've lost patients and, you know, they hold back. But I think your caring and your compassion is more important than anything you say. But I also think people's lives are shaped most by those tough times. And it's like when people have a pain situation, when people have a failure, you know, when they succeed, they party. When they fail, they ponder, you know, when they have a problem, they ponder. But what I would tell you is that here's the way I'd explain it to you. We don't experience life. We experience the life we focus on. So right now, there are millions of things you could focus on. What happened yesterday, where you're going to have for lunch, what I'm saying, what it means, you know, the background of Advisors Excel and your imagery, you know, the feeling of your clothing against your skin, which you weren't thinking until I mentioned it. There's millions of things to look at, but you know, what's wrong is always available. So is what's right. And so learning to control 3 decisions is how you can help people. The first decision, and by the way, everyone right now, you can test this within yourself. All of you listening or watching are making these 3 decisions. Now, you may not be making them consciously, so they may be habitual. And if you answer these same decisions habitually, you'll have the same life. Nothing changes. So what do you change? The first decision we make every moment of our life is, what are we going to focus on? Right now, if you're listening, whatever you focus on, you're going to feel, even if it's not true. If you focus on, oh my God, the economy is falling apart and the stock market's overvalued and everything else, you're going to have fear. There's no question about it. If you focus on, wait, there are some unbelievable opportunities in the midst of this I'm going to take advantage of, you're going to be excited. So focus controls feelings. And you can focus on something that empowers you or disempowers you. The second decision, as soon as we focus on something, we have to decide what something means. Is this the end or the beginning? Is this, you know, is this person disrespecting me? Is this person challenging me? Is this person coaching me? Is this person loving on me? Whatever meaning we give things changes our emotion, and our emotion changes the third decision. What are we going to do? So if you think it's the end of a relationship, Cody, are you going to treat people the same way as if you think it's the beginning of a relationship? No, it's just human nature. It's different. In fact, I tell people, if you don't want your relationship to end, you know, you can treat it like it's, you know, the beginning of the relationship, even though you've been there 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, right? I know you've done that very successfully in your marriage.
Yeah.
So those 3 decisions control your life. But here's what I'd say. So it's more than just words in your mind. Let me give you 3 examples that your advisors right now listening could test out in their own mind. Let's just take focus. There's patterns of focus. Your life is controlled by what you focus on. Whether you're happy or not is what you focus on. You're going to be focused on all the stuff in the world that's horrible and be obsessed. And, oh my God, there's going to be a nuclear war. I'm going to die. You could be focused on your children or your life or the beauty of the gifts in your life, and you're going to be really grateful. But let's just take 3 patterns. One pattern is, I'm asking everyone who's listening, do you tend to focus more on what you have or what's missing? Now, I know what that number looks like when I go to an audience of 10 or 20,000 people, but in your audience, what do you think it is here? What do you think? For you, Cody, do you focus more on what you have or what's missing? We do both, all of us, but what do you think you focus on more?
I would say I'm probably more what I have.
Yes, and that's my experience of you as well. It's one of the reasons you're a happy person.
Yeah.
Most achievers focus on what's missing. And there's nothing wrong with that for a moment. Like, okay, this is what I need to change. This is what I need to improve and focus on it. But when it becomes your habit, if you're constantly focused on what's missing, and by the way, COVID really magnified that because people felt like they're missing their life. They're missing their social life. They're missing their kids going to school, all those things. And it got locked into a lot of people, and that's become their pattern more than ever. So even if you're successful, if all you're focusing on is what you're missing, how can you sustain happiness? It's not you, it's software. It's a pattern. You change that pattern and you change your whole life. Second pattern, do you tend to focus more on what you can or can't control? I know the answer for you for sure, and probably most of your advisors. What is it for you?
Can.
That's right.
Yeah.
And by the way, most people in my seminars focus on what they can control. That's why they come, because they're looking to get skills to take control, change their finances, their business, their life, their emotions, right? So they're driven in that way. But most of them have this conflict, constantly focus on what's missing, but I do want to focus on what I can control. People that focus on what's missing and what they can't control, which is more the majority of the culture, the people that are sometimes our clients, those people are going to be frustrated, pissed off, worried, depressed. You can't stay in a good place when you feel like you're not in control of your life. Our self-esteem as human beings is tied directly to how much do we feel we control events versus events control us. So that's another pattern. A third pattern, simple one. Do you tend to focus more on the past, the present, or the future? We do all 3. Where do you think you spend more of your focus?
I'm probably, if I'm being honest, future focused, probably the most.
Yes, and that most business people, that's true. It's part of how you succeed. You're anticipating. Leaders anticipate, losers react. You play a video game against a child, they beat you every time. It's not because they're smarter or faster, because they played this game so many times. They know the first bad guy's here, then here. You're trying to figure it out. You're dead in 3 seconds. They go for 45 minutes before you get your next turn, right? So the capacity to focus on the future gives you anticipation. But what makes the greatest happiness, truthfully, is those that can focus on the present and the future, right? So they don't miss what's here. And you're damn good at that. I would agree. You're more focused.
Could be better, though. Yeah.
So think of just those 3 patterns alone. If you take somebody, well, here's what I'd ask you. I ask audiences all the time, 20,000 people, I'll say, how many of you know someone who's on antidepressants and they're still depressed? And 80%, 90% of the room raises their hand.
Yep.
Why? Because antidepressants, all they do is try to suppress the emotion, right? All it does is try to numb you, but it doesn't deal with the issue. The issue is these people are constantly focusing on what's missing, what's not they're in control of, and very often what's in their past, which they can't change. So just a couple changes, Cody, and a couple patterns can take someone. And when you're talking to someone who's going through a tough time, to answer your question, asking questions that lead them to focus on the beauty of that person. One of my dearest friends in right arm last night, brother just died, total shock in the middle of the night last night, 10 o'clock. And we just found out. But what happened was, you got to tap into what do they believe. You influence people by knowing what already influences them, not by what influences you. And she has a very strong religious background, and so does members of her family. And her mom died recently. And I said, how do you think your mom's going to feel receiving your brother? And she lit up like a Christmas tree. She was crying and asked, because her change of focus put her into something that had more meaning, positive meaning for her. It's like, okay, this isn't the end. This is for her. Now, for someone else who doesn't believe that, you'd have to do something different. But understanding changing focus changes emotion. Change emotion, you change somebody's life.
That's great. Okay, I want to talk, kind of hit on health there a little bit at the end. One of the, I would say, best decisions that I have made over the past few years, my wife also, and now I think we have almost 100 advisors and their spouses who have become members of Fountain Life, which I know you co-founded. I learned about it when I was reading Life Force when you wrote that book. I remember I texted you and just said, hey, tell me about this. And we didn't text. You left me like a voice memo back, but you kind of said maybe even more directly like, hey, Cody, you make enough money, go invest it in your health, right? That's been great advice. So thank you for that advice. First and foremost, it's been a great experience. But what made you get involved in Fountain Life? And can you just talk about maybe the future of longevity in healthcare and what they're doing and what you're seeing on how people can improve their health? I'll tell you, when we have more time, some of the stories of our advisors. One who had 95% blockage when he went in, had to have open heart surgery within a week. I mean, just some really cool stories of things they didn't know. Yeah. So maybe just talk about that a little.
Well, I think I'd start, because everybody here does well financially, is to remind you that richest man in the graveyard is not your goal, right? So I start the book with Life Force with a little quote, and it simply says, a person with health has 100 dreams, a person without it has one. It's like, how many people would trade all the money in the world to get back their health? So you want to provide that in advance. And the biggest challenge we have is we don't measure things. Like if you get your car, something's breaking, you get a warning sign. We don't usually get warning signs till we're really in trouble. And why I got involved is, you know me, I'm a biohacker. I do events, 14, 15, 20. I just did Germany. We had 14,000 people. We had 64 countries, 7 languages translated simultaneously, stadium to the very top. And I went 13 straight hours without a break, 4 straight days. So the demands on my body are insane. So I've been a biohacker. So I've always done, hyperbaric oxygen, what am I going to do to get the inflammation down in my body? I'm going to use the coldest terms that I possibly can, So all that has been a part of my life. But then I had this experience where I was chasing a professional snowboarder who was 22 years old down the side of a mountain. And I'm not a professional, nor was I 22. And I had a wreck he went over this jump and I tried to do the jump and I woke up, I was knocked out and I thought I'd broken my neck. My whole face was numb, my teeth were numb. Anyway, long story short, I ripped all of my rotator cuffs so severely. And so I'm fortunate enough to own pieces of various sports teams, and we have some of the greatest surgeons in the world, right? The Golden State Warriors, the LA Dodgers, LAFC. And so I went to I always get more than one opinion, because I read the Mayo Clinic describing that the second opinion is different 82% of the time.
That's crazy.
It just blows my mind. So I got 3 opinions, all of them surgery, surgery, surgery. And it's like, okay, well, how long does it take to recover? I got to be on stage, right? And it's like, probably 6 months. It could be a little longer, a little less, and 6 months. And then it's like, what's the chance of it tearing again? They go, well, it's not uncommon for it to tear again, have to go through it all over again. And I'm like, what about stem cells? Because, I've worked with, some of the greatest athletes in the world. And I've seen, Cristiano Ronaldo, one of the greatest players in history of soccer and football, says, he was supposed to be out for 6 months. They did 6 weeks with stem cells. And so all the docs said, no, those stem cells, this is too severe. That'll never do it for you. So my co-author is Dr. Peter Diamandis, a good friend of mine. And I called him and I said, I want to understand stem cells in more detail. I know a little bit about it. I've read a lot about it. I know the FDA has approved it for like 80 different diseases. More than 1 million people have done it. But who's the best in the world at that? He goes, I know the guy. His name's Dr. Bob Hariri. And Bob became a 3rd author of the book with me. And it was kind of like if I said to you, Cody, teach me a little bit of NBA. Who could teach me? You go, I got a friend named LeBron James, do that kind of thing. Yep. He's like the father of that. So I went to meet him and he said, Tony, I got to tell you something. He said, they're right using your stem cells. I was at 53 at the time. He said, they're not going to do it. After 40, they drop off the cliff. But you want 4-day-old stem cells. He said, we're not talking about fetal tissue. We're talking about the cords that usually get thrown away. And so I went down to Panama, a place there, and I've been to many now. I know the best places, but they did a great job. They gave me, shots and IV. The first day I was super tired. They said, just go to sleep. Second day I was super tired. I woke up for the first time in 15 years with no pain in my spine. I had extreme spinal stenosis from jumping and all this, and no pain in my shoulder. And I couldn't believe it. We went to the MRI, a month and a half later, shoulders, that was 10 years ago. My shoulder's still perfect. So now the Pope calls and invites me. Believe it or not, the Pope every 2 years puts on the biggest regenerative conference in the world, because it's not fetal cells. So he sees stem cells as the gift from God. And so they wanted me to clean up speaker in a 4-day seminar. I said, only if I get to come for all 4 days and learn. So I sat through session after session with the greatest regenerative doctors in the world. And I met people that were sent home to die who now are completely healed and turned around through stem cells, through CAR T cells, all these different treatments. And I was like, how does the world not know about it? And then when I found out, and this is the answer to your question, is people that from the time a breakthrough happens to the time your physician starts to implement it on average is 17 years. So I said, I'm going to write a book like I did my financial books. It's not going to be my opinion. I'm going to interview 150 Nobel laureates, best scientists in the world, best regenerative doctors, and I'm going to bring to the forefront the best tools that exist right now that people don't know about, make it happen. So like Parkinson's, there's a treatment for Parkinson's that works right now. I went to the Rockefeller Center to see it. They use this extreme not MRI, electro components. If they call it incisionless brain surgery. And they come in, they use ultrasound, the word I was looking for. And they use extreme ultrasound. They find the spot in your brain that's making those trembles happen. So I saw this man, he was 71 years old from West Virginia, a mechanic his whole life, and his hands like this constantly. Couldn't hold a glass of water, nothing. Once they figured it out, the whole treatment is 3 minutes. He comes out, I hand him the glass of water. He reaches like this, grabs the glass, brings it back, drinks it perfectly. His wife and his daughter there, they're crying uncontrollably. I go to take the water, he goes, I think I'm gonna hang on to this for a while, But that's available in 100 universities right now, and insurance will cover it, and most people don't even know about it, right?
Yep.
Or another example is I built Fountain Life because when I wrote the book, I was like, people need a place to go where all these answers are there and where they can do the scans, because otherwise you're going one place for one thing, for another. So I brought the best doctors together, co-founded it with Peter, and we put it together. And we found over the last 4 years, 5 years, on average, 14.5% of the people come in like your friend thinking they have no problem.
Yep.
And they have a life-threatening disease. I have a friend that I sent there that found out he had kidney cancer. But here's the secret. Most of the cancers that get us are because we don't test for them. So we do colon tests, we do mammograms and so forth. But there's so many other, and we get them too late. If you get something according to Cancer Society, when it's like at stage 3 or 4, you have an 80% chance of dying. My view is you got a 20% chance of living, but their point is well made. If you get it at stage 1 or 2, you have a 99.9% chance of succeeding and being healthy and living. So what we catch things little because we have these blood tests and the MRI. Sometimes the blood test can find us the newest blood test in the world for 50 different pieces. Sometimes it's the MRI. When you do both, you're going to find it. And so many people's lives have been changed. It sounds saved by just doing this. And you just do it each year. You got a digital upload of what's going on in your body. But then there's tools like, there's a new tool called you probably had it done, the CCTA Clearly scan.
Clearly, yeah.
Yeah. And what it does is most CT scans are very hard to read. So what it does is it literally goes through your entire body and shows where there is soft plaque versus hardened. If it's hardened, it's calcified, you're totally healthy. But if it's soft, it can break off, and that's the widowmaker, give you a stroke or give you a heart attack. So I went with my 81-year-old father-in-law. I said, look, Pops, I've been watching him. He was a lumber guy. He's a strong man his whole life. He's 80. Everybody's saying, you're getting older. He's starting to believe that crap. So I said, let's go and do this new test. I said, my team called me. They just got it. We're the first ones in the world for it. I said, I'm sure we're going to have some, soft pieces in there, but they'll show us what to do to get rid of it. But let's go look, Pops. He goes, okay. So I take him over there. The guy goes through it. He has nothing. Everything is calcified. He is healthy as a freaking horse. And then he had this hip problem. And we have this process that we do that's called hydrodissection. I had a nerve in my foot that for over 15 years, if you touched it, I went through the roof. Like somebody massaged me, don't touch it. Like nerve pain. And what it does is use this fluid and opens up the areas that are crinkled or the nerves are trapped. I have no problem with it whatsoever. My father-in-law had this problem with his hip, so he couldn't walk well. They treated him on that. He did the test. We got on the plane. I'll never forget this, Cody. He's sitting across from me. He goes, Tone, when people talk about living 110, 120, I don't buy that. He goes, my heart is perfect. My veins are clear. He goes, I can walk perfectly. I think I could go another 15, 20 years, don't you?
Yeah.
So I love seeing people not only solve a problem, but also it gives you peace of mind. And then we have every tool you can imagine at Fountain Life. That's why we built it, because it changes people's lives. It saves lives.
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, and then, the ongoing of like putting a game plan together, because I had done Mayo Clinic's, Executive Physical, all the others. And it's like, kind of give you a few things. There's no real follow-up. It's been good. Obviously, you talked about how optimizing your health has been a priority for a long time. What's the one thing you're doing today that's paying the biggest dividends? And maybe something like that would be an easy thing for everyone to do that you're just seeing a lot of benefit from.
Some real easy ones would be cryotherapy, because inflammation is the beginning of disease. And cryotherapy in 2 minutes you basically freeze your body.
Yep.
And your body, the inflammation will, I get on stage. Imagine if you're on stage 13 hours, I jump on average 1,000 times. That these guys measure me for 3 years. I weigh 295. So every time you hit, it's 4 times your body weight. So 1,000,000 pounds of pressure a day, right? 1,000 pounds times 1,000. And I do it for 4 days in a row. So when they did my bone mass, there's Olympic athletes and there's a gorilla and then there's me. It's just ridiculous in those demands. But my point is, the inflammation in my body at the end of that is horrific. And I used to try to ice like football, go on ice water and all that stuff. In 2 minutes, I'm done. And there are places all over the country where you can go, and it's great for women for their skin. The other one is hyperbaric oxygen is the only thing that's proven to actually reverse aging. It's the only thing on earth that's done that. And I have one and I use it. I'll tell you a simple one is infrared saunas. We all know about saunas, but the research on it today is unbelievable. If you go 4 times a week to a sauna at 160 degrees for 20 minutes, 160 degrees for 20 minutes, and infrared sauna would be ideal, but you can do it with the regular sauna as well. You have a 50% chance less of dying of cardiovascular disease and a 61% less chance of having a stroke. I mean, I could go on and on. This is one of the greatest things you can do for yourself. It's the equivalent of 35 minutes aerobic exercise for people. So people that don't feel like exercising, I always get them started by getting them in a sauna, and they learn to get used to that process. You build up to your 20 minutes, and then pretty soon you feel like doing other things. You feel like working out because your body really, really does well. But those would be a few things. And then there's, accessing stem cells and exosomes. I mean, if you want to rejuvenate your body, there's nothing like it on the face of the earth.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, people should go pick up the book, right? Life Force, you go through a lot of that. So, but I heard you talking about saunas on something recently, and a lot of those now, you don't even have to buy them, right? There's so many places, even here in Topeka, that you can go sign up for a membership. So that's good. Okay, time we have left. I want to move into really investing, finance. This has been a space you've spent a lot of time in lately. Actually, it's how we first met when you were writing Money Master the Game, but you've got this new book, The Holy Grail of Investing, that really dives deep into, I guess I'd say, like, what do the most successful investors focus on? It's probably the easiest way to describe it. So maybe I'll ask this question, but I'll let you kind of go whatever direction you want. I know one of the people that's been a big part of your life and journey, especially in this space, has been Ray Dalio, who is obviously one of the most successful investors of all time. What'd you learn from Ray that really resonated, but also like maybe just some of the experts and gurus that you talked to in this book? Like, what are some of the principles that you took away from that?
Well, when I wrote Money Master the Game, where I interviewed the first 50 people that I interviewed, that was Ray Dalio, Carl Icahn, Warren Buffett, and many of those people, about 13 or 14 of the 50, have become dear friends. Ray's become a dear friend. They all had different strategies for investing. Some are macro investors, right? Some are value investors, et cetera. But they all had in common four things that I think are so simple that are worth reviewing just for 2 seconds. One is the number one rule they all have is so different than other people is they're focused on avoiding the downside. In other words, they say don't lose. We've all heard Warren Buffett's rule number one, don't lose money, rule number one, see rule number two, or rule number two, see rule number one.
Yep.
But the way they do that is that they all agree on is the right asset allocation. Because they all know they're going to be wrong. It's not like watching guys on CNBC or something who tell you how it's going to be. They're full of it, right? You keep making enough prognostications, you're going to be right some of the time, and then they publish that. But the smartest people, they know where they're going to be wrong. So the most important thing is the asset allocation so that it's broken up. And that's the most important distinction I got from, which I'll tell you just after the other four. But having the right asset allocation, so you're never going to be betting the farm. You really have the right balance there. When I interviewed several people that were in the institutional investing side, David Swenson, who now passed away from Yale, greatest institutional investor of all time. He told me point blank, 99.9% of all your returns is based on asset allocation. It's not if you bought Apple or not, or this apartment building or not. It's your asset allocation. It's everything. But then the second part of that is you really want, all these people are really looking for is the holy grail for them really is, how do I get asymmetrical risk reward? How do I, people think of billionaires as taking giant risks. Well, there's a few that have done that, but most of them don't usually keep the billions if they do that. What makes them incredible is they figure out how to produce the least amount of risk for the most amount of upside. So Paul Tudor Jones, as you know, has been my client for 26, 27 years. I mean, I've learned so much working with Paul. We've been through every market you can imagine. He's succeeded like nobody in his category. Probably the most successful single trade in history was the one he did in 1987. So I mean, when the market went down 20%, still biggest drop in history percentage-wise in a day, he made 100% of money for his people that day. I mean, just brilliant guy. But what they all are focused on when Paul was at his best, and I had to come in to help turn him around, was he dropped the principle of 5-to-1. His view was, if I'm going to risk $1, I got to believe I'm going to make 5. I'm going to be wrong a lot of the times. And if I'm wrong, I can risk another $1 and make 4. He could be wrong 4 times out of 5 and still be okay. That's why he makes money. That's the way that they play the game. You know, a good example is Richard Branson. Richard's a friend. Richard, when he decided to build Virgin, I mean, that's a risky thing. You're going to take on British Airways? I mean, come on, right? So he literally negotiated for 1.5 years with Boeing till he got him to agree to a deal where in the first 2 years, if he didn't make it, he could turn back all the planes and pay nothing. So he had 0 downside, all upside, right? So when you think about the people that are the best in the world at what they're doing, they all found that way. You know, I have a friend based out of Texas who went out and he took $20 million in 2008 and turned it into $2 billion. And he did it because he saw the real estate market. Everybody believed it was going to go up forever. He created some synthetic ways to invest. He could be wrong 16 times and still make money. So that's how he did it. But when I asked him, how do you explain asymmetrical risk reward to like somebody who's not as sophisticated? He goes, well, Tony, it's so interesting you say that. I was thinking, how do I teach it to my kids? And he said, so one day I sat down and thought to myself, what is a riskless investment? And I said, well, a riskless investment would have no upside, right? He goes, you know, that's what everybody believes. He goes, but I like asking questions nobody else has answers for. And he goes, and I thought about it enough until sooner or later, he goes, I finally realized what it was. I said, what was it? He goes, nickels. He said, if I buy 20 million nickels, they're never going to go down. They're always going to be worth what I gave them. So I have no downside. He said, but nickels, the government, it takes 9 cents for them to make a nickel. And he goes, the smelt value is 6.7 cents. So 5 cents is really worth 6.7 a meltdown, and the government's paying 9 to make it. He goes, they used to do that with pennies. It was 97% copper. Now it's 2% copper. But those, I said, so, but you can't melt down those nickels. He goes, Tony, I called the Federal Reserve and I told my kids, this is what we're going to do. I bought all the nickels they would sell me, $20 million of nickels, truckwards of the nickels. He goes, if I could push a button tomorrow and put all my money in nickels, I'd do it tomorrow. He said, I said, but you can't melt it down. He goes, that's illegal. He said, but there are other ways. He smiled. He goes, but I don't need to. Copper pennies from the original pennies, when they took the copper out, they went up 100%. He goes, the day I buy those nickels, I'm already up 37%. He said, it's a riskless trade. So I taught my kids that way. So I think asymmetrical reward. Then the third one is tax efficiency. You don't start with that. Obviously, you're an idiot if you do, but it's the biggest bill you have. So you got to look at how do you use vehicles that make that work. And then the fourth one is, of course, diversification. But what's interesting about these 4 simple principles is what Ray added to it was this. My first meeting was supposed to be 30 minutes and went 3.5 hours. We were pitching and catching, and he loved that I understood. So we went back and forth. That's how we became friends. And so my last question was, okay, we've covered so much in these hours. What's the single most important investment principle that investors should make at the top of their list, the top of their focus? And he said, Tony, I call it the holy grail of investing. And that's what the book's written by.
Yep.
The holy grail of investing is finding 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments. If you can find 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments that you really believe are going to be successful, you reduce your risk by 80% and your upside stays the same or increases. So I heard this, I was like, wow, that's great. And then a month later, I was speaking at the JP Morgan Alternative Investment Conference, and you have to be a billionaire to get in, right? Ray is speaking right before me. Somebody asked him a question similar to my own, and he goes, I'll tell you the most important principle. He's holy grail. It says the same thing. And all these everybody in the room is a billionaire. No staff is allowed to be there or anything else. And most people have been sitting, listening like this the whole time. Every head in the room went down and started writing. We all know about asset allocation. We all know about diversification, but that simple principle struck everybody. I was like, okay, I got to go do this. So it's very hard to do though when you only use public markets, right? And so I started studying the private markets, and then I discovered things that I'm sure you know, many of your advisors I'm sure know, that in the last 37 years, every single stock market in the globe was outperformed by basic private equity on an average of 50% per year compounded. So for example, the S&P 500 of the last 37 years, 10.7. Average private equity, not the people I wrote about in the book. These are the masters of the universe. They're all 20% compounded or more. Some of them are 36% for 26 years. I mean, it's unbelievable, right? So average private equity is 15.7. So imagine compounding 50% more per year. If you put $1 million in 37 years ago and you go, okay, what's that worth today? Well, I was jotting the number down. It's $42 million that was in the S&P. If you were an average private equity, it's $223 million. So I'm like, and then I found out the asset allocation of the ultra wealthy is on average 46% is in private markets. Only 27% is in public markets. So I'm like, okay, I'm on the wrong trail here. I need to shift this. And that's how I'm going to get my 8 to 12 uncorrelated investments. But then you go out to try to do it. And, I got a name, fortunately, and I have a lot of people, a network. And so I was able to get with some of the best people. But the slice I got was, in my world, wasn't big enough to really make a giant difference. So I was like, I was lamenting about this to a friend of mine that used to be a partner with Paul Tudor, has his own firm now. And he said, Tony, you've done so much for me. I have to tell you where I put most of my money. I said, most of your money? He goes, yeah. He goes, there's this firm in Houston, Texas. I said, first we said Houston. I'm like, Houston? It's like, not London, not Singapore, not New York. He goes, it's Houston. That's why he's been under the cover. He goes, you should never fight to be a limited partner again. You want to become a general partner. You want to own a piece of these firms, not a piece of the fund. And I was like, you can do that? He said, yeah. He goes, Tony, it's unbelievable. You get the 2 and 20. He goes, if you look at the Fortune 500 or the Forbes 400 richest people in the world, if I ask you what industry do you think has the most people on that list, most people say tech or they say real estate. It's not. It's financial services.
Yep.
And it's not hedge funds. Hedge funds have barely outproduced, the market. In most cases, they haven't. It's these masters of the universe that do private equity because they're not trying to find alpha by finding the right timing. Sure, they look for the right price and timing, but it's all about taking a company, owning an ecosystem, and adding value in that area. And then, then I started seeing Vista. And we're like, okay, I interviewed 13 of these guys. So you look at Robert Smith. Robert Smith has produced, I can't say the numbers legally, so more than 20% compounded for 26 straight years. He is the master of the universe, but he figured the area, like it's SaaS, right? It's enterprise management. He has built an ecosystem second to none. He's able to add value and grow companies so rapidly. Veritas, you go to that group, they were 2 billion 12 years ago. They're 45 billion AUM right now. The gentleman started Ramsey. His partner died. He kept everybody on board and he cracked the code of how to sell to the government. He found this niche. Any company he brings in, he's produced 33% compounded. So it's like these people know things at a different level. So I went and I met with this group called CAS, which now I'm a partner in, and Christopher Zook, who's my co-author of this book, The Holy Grail. And the first thing impressed me was the guy focuses so much on the downside. He looks at 1,500 deals a year and invests in 15. I mean, that's how sharp he is. In the last 23 years, and he's been using my stuff. He went to Business Mastery 20 plus years ago. In the last 23 years, they've had 96% profitability in alternative investments, realized or unrealized gains. I mean, it's unheard of. So I started getting involved with him, and now I own 85 different private equity firms. And I'm talking about, big firms, CVC, Starwood, Vista, Veritas, Silver Lake. I mean, the best of the best, $20 billion, $100 billion firms, and I get the 2 and 20. So the 2% gives me about a 10% cash flow per year, better than you can find with bonds or that nature. And I've got the teens growth upside on that side. And because the diversification I have is across so many countries, so many different industries, and it's the best of the best, it's one of my favorite investments in the world. So I got involved with him. Then I got involved with private credit, because I remember in 2021, when people were investing in junk bonds to get 3.9%, I'm like, are you insane? You're taking that much risk for 3.9? I was getting 9% in private credit. Because what happened in 2008 is all these banks started not loaning companies. Well, 96% of companies with a $250 million revenue or higher are privately held.
Yep.
There used to be 8,000 companies in the stock market. Now there's 4,000, right? So the opportunities outside of this, well, these guys figured out, you know what? They need money. So if you look at somebody like David Golub of Golub Capital, he's produced an average return, I think it's almost 11% for decade after decade. Because also, by the way, when interest rates went up, as you know, right? So did you. You have the same loan, you have the same level of risk, which by the way, his risk level is he's lost 0.5%. Any bank would die for that kind of downside, right?
Yep.
And so you got this incredible return that's 2 or 3 times greater by being in private credit. The last one I'll mention is professional sports. I spent a lifetime wanting to have a sports team. That was the thing I was excited about. And so the first one I got was the LAFC football club. I helped to build it from the beginning with Peter Guber, my partners. And it's like, and then I moved from LA to Florida, so I'm never there for the games. I went for the championship. I got my ring. It was fun. But it's like what you had to go through to own a piece of a sports team is insane. A microscope, the amount of money was ridiculous. But now the rules have changed in the last few years. And so we have this direct relationship where now you can own pieces of multiple sports teams and multiple areas. Now, why would you want that? Well, if you're trying to find 8 to 12 uncorrelated, asset investments, this is an incredible field. This is an area where imagine you get a business that's a legal monopoly. No one else can sell your services in that area if you own the Dodgers, right? Or whatever your firm is in that area. You have you got your piece of the league, the NBA, MLB, you get your portion of whatever they sell nationally, internationally. And the NFL is just approved to do this. They were the last holdout to do it. And so we're working on the NFL as we speak right now. But the NFL, the average firm gets $450 million a year from the league as their percentage. It's incredible, right? Compounded 14% per year over the last 14 years, to give you an idea. We bought, Peter Guber, my good friend and partner, he bought the Dodgers along with a dear friend of yours who helped to fund a part of your business as well. So the group came together and they bought it for, if you probably remember, $2 billion. Everybody in the media said they're insane. The most anybody paid is $1 billion. Maybe it's worth $1.1 billion, the Dodgers. And so I went to see Peter, and Peter says, Tony, he goes, I'm not an idiot. I said, obviously. He goes, how about, he makes movies, 52 Academy Award nominations, right? So he goes, I'm gonna leave you on a cliffhanger. I'm gonna announce this tomorrow. When you hear the announcement, come over and we'll celebrate together. So I waited, I watched the next day, and they announced, they bought it for $2 billion. They sold the local rights, not the international rights or the national rights, for $7 billion and made $5 billion right there. So the opportunity in sports is extraordinary. It's a completely different industry. Your customers are multi-generational. They're called fans. That means fanatics, right? And during good times and bad, during depressions, recessions, even coming out of COVID with the entire lockdown, they've seen an explosion up. So to me, it's just another favorite area that I love. So we do all of these. Last thing I want to mention is the number of people that now are accredited because of inflation has exploded. It used to be 2% of the population. Now it's like 25 million people. It's growing to 10 to 12%. And the reason I wrote the book also was because Congress passed a law. It hasn't been passed by the Senate yet, but it will. It was bipartisan. It was 380 to, out of 420. So it's a huge bipartisan bill that said it's silly to say you're an accredited investor because you got $1 million or $200,000 income, because a lot of people are good in business, but not a good investor. They're not sophisticated, or they inherited their money. So you can take a test once the Senate passes it, and you'll become accredited. Well, that's going to open up a giant market of people. And we have, a particular fund that's available with all the tools we have, the things in sports, the things in private credit, things in private equity as well, all in a fund that accredited investors can now be a part of as well. So those are going to be all opportunities that we can do together. I think you're going to discuss it with our team in January.
Yeah. Actually, Christopher's coming up on the show here, I think, in a few episodes, and I know our team's working pretty close with him. Let me ask this question real quick, especially on that accredited, and I'm seeing this. Our advisors are sitting in front of more high net worth clients than ever before. Yep. What is it about some of these alternatives, maybe even psychologically, that higher net worth clients just love? Because, I mean, we're excited about this because those stories just really attract that high net worth client.
Yes. I think the number one thing is anybody does their homework. If you can compound 50% faster, you'd be an idiot not to do it, but also because it has less downside. These private equity guys, right? Look, interest rates went up. It's supposed to, people say it's going to kill the private equity business. It didn't kill it at all. The big guys are still doing incredibly well.
Yep.
The small people have their challenges because they can't borrow the money, but you have less competitors then for the people who have the money. So they're making better deals. I mean, our groups are doing incredibly well. But when a downtime happens, they don't have to sell. And so if you look at it, in every single bear market, every big drop, their drops are smaller and they're the first ones to recover. And they look at it as opportunity. So if I have less downside, I got higher returns. The only thing I look at is liquidity. And we even have structures at CAS for liquidity where
Mm-hmm.
people can actually not have to sell their shares, they can borrow against them, and we can provide that for them as well. So as long as those things are in place, yes, there's a place for the public markets, of course, but there's a reason why it's 26% and not 46 or 47 for ultra wealthy people. And what I'm looking forward to is, it seems crazy that the not wealthy people don't get the best returns under the guise that they're not sophisticated. So I really think this move is really, really important. But think about it, I know you've got a lot of qualified purchasers, I'm sure, in your group, but 1 out of 5 people now is an accredited investor in this country.
Yeah.
That's and it's only going to grow with this approach when the Senate passes it.
Yeah, it'll be good. I was going to say, and I don't want to get us off on a rabbit trail, the other way to guarantee your returns is be a politician, it appears. So their market timing is incredible. So, okay, I want to ask one final question, then we're going to do these just quick lightning round questions so I can get you out of here. And this one's maybe a little deeper. One of the more powerful things I've heard you talk about, but really teach, is this idea of the 6 basic human needs and how everything we do is driven by those. And I've seen a lot of people sell businesses. We've had some advisors sell it. It was funny. I was just having this conversation. That's why I want to ask you. They sold it thinking, and it probably meets that human need of certainty. Now they've got this big pile of money, but I think many of them realize now how much they're unfulfilled in these other areas. Can you just talk about maybe how business, but just how important it is to make sure you're finding something that fulfills, multiple of those human needs, not just one?
Well, just real quick, it's a larger subject, but let me do it real quick. What I found is I travel the world, right? So I worked in 193 countries, every country in the world that the UN recognizes. And one of the things I noticed was we have the same problems in every country. Didn't matter the culture. Like you go to Asia, obviously you have to speak differently because it's about the group, not the individual, right? You come to the West, it's about the individual. So you don't want to lose face in Asia. There's different rules, but there's certain things that are completely in common. That's why I have problems. That's why we have opportunities. And there are needs, not desires, but needs that are built into humans. So one is the need for certainty, the need to know that you can avoid pain, that you can ideally be comfortable. And that's a survival need, because if I'm constantly in pain, it's going to be constant damage equals death. So that's the base need. But what's ironic is if you're totally certain every moment what people are going to say, what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, you get bored out of your mind, right? So the second need is the need for uncertainty, the need for variety, the need for surprise. And we all need that. When you ask people, how many of you love surprises? And I'll ask a room of 20,000 people and they all go, yeah. And I go, BS, you don't love surprises. You love surprises you want. The ones you don't want, you call problems, right? But we need variety. If we have too much certainty, we're bored. If we have too much variety, we're freaked out. Is it a balance? No, it's learning how to get both from something. If you've ever rented a movie that you've already watched, I always ask people, have you ever done that? People say, oh yeah. And I say, well, get a life first. But I've done it too. Why do you do it? Because you've seen it before, so you're certain it's good. You hope it's been long enough, you forget enough that there's variety when you watch it again, right? So there's ways to meet both needs. The third need is the need for significance, the need to feel unique, special, important. And everybody has this need. Some people say, oh, I don't need to be important. Everybody wants to feel needed or important or significant in some way. Some people get that, by the way, they get certainty, let's say, by controlling everything or by rituals. Some people get variety by constantly shaking things up. Some people get significance by having a bigger problem than anybody else. And they talk about it constantly. Some people get significance by taking risks and doing what you've done, build a huge business, help millions of people around the world, right? But everyone finds a different way. Some people do it by having more earrings or, different color hair. We all find a way to be significant. The only question is your way of meeting certainty or variety or significance. Is it empowering you or disempowering you? Smoking will make you feel certain and comfortable, but it'll also kill you because when you breathe and take a deep breath, you don't feel stressed anymore, right? So you got to find which way serve. The fourth human need is love and connection. Most people settle for connection because love feels a little scary, because if they ever had love and it went away, they don't want that feeling again. Those basic needs, everyone finds a way to meet. If you have to lie to yourself, work 20-hour days, you're going to find a way to do it. Maybe not at a 10 of certainty or 10 of variety or 10 of love, but somewhere in that 3 to 10 range. But the ultimate needs are spiritual needs. We have to grow, because if you don't grow, you feel dead inside. That's what I was talking about earlier. And you have to contribute beyond yourself for your life to have meaning. It's a law of life. Everything in the universe either grows or dies. Everything in the universe either contributes or eventually it's eliminated. So those 6 needs, people tend to specialize in 2 of them, meaning they value them more. Some people, certainty is everything. I want to know how it works, where it does, and those clients. You got to deal with them differently. Some people, variety. Some people, What matters is they're significant. I'm the best. I only want to work with the best, right?
Yep.
So when you're marketing to someone, it's good to see what's their leading system. Some people want the relationship with you. The fact they like you is why they're going to do business. Someone else might do a better job, but they're going to stay with you, right? Some people do things to grow, some people to contribute. Having said all that, when you look at your business, I have 114 businesses. We do $9 billion in business across all these different industries now. It's just ridiculous. It's amazing. Don't have to work another day of my life. But I learned early on by watching other people 20 years ahead of me who sold their business and made 800 million. Another guy made 1.2 billion. And I watched the same pattern happen every time. They got all this cash and they were certain and they were significant and they felt so excited for about 90 days to maximum 6 months. And then both the guys I'm describing, both of them came to me, what do I do? And one of them wanted to buy his company back, but he couldn't do it. I mean, they were so, because think about this. If you have a business and you're good at it, it gives you certainty. It feels awesome. If you're in business, no matter what business, there's going to be uncertainty. Markets change, things happen. So you're challenged. You're always having to grow. If you're in business and you're good at it, you're the best. You're significant. If you're in business and you care about the people, you're connected to the people and the clients. So you're meeting all your needs. You have to grow, you have to contribute. So you meet all 6 needs. When something meets 1 need, feels good. When it meets 2 needs, you are pulled to it. When something meets at least 3 needs, it becomes an addiction. It can be a positive addiction or a negative addiction. So your business met all those needs. Now you sell your business. You're certain you got money. You go to be on the beach. You go play golf. Now, some people, that's okay with it. It's not nothing wrong with it. But most people I know that became successful at that level, they're starving for what's going to make me feel like I'm growing. What's the challenge? What's the piece there? And I've seen so many people get depressed after liquidating. I found the best thing for people to do is get a partner, sell a piece, and then still be in a mentoring role. That's what I did with most of my companies. Yeah. So the company can grow more and bring another generation in. I got huge cash flow to use whatever I want, but I'm still in the game. And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing at this stage. So I tell people, be careful what you wish for. And by the way, it doesn't mean you don't have to work. You could say, I'm going to do all nonprofit things now, or I'm going to play golf professionally. I'm going to just go at it fully and it's going to engage me completely. But you got to find something that meets most of your needs if you're going to be fulfilled.
Yeah, it's the first time I heard you talk about it, such a good lesson. So I just wanted you to share. Okay, I want to get you out of here. We do these quick lightning round questions at the end. They can be, short answers. First one.
You think I'm capable of short answers?
Well, I didn't want to say that, but so the first one's this, like going back to COVID, I think every leader maybe left that period with like a new lesson or maybe something that was reinforced. Is there one thing that you feel like you took away from that time that just has really stuck with you that you're going to carry forward for the rest of your life?
I said it earlier, so I'm sorry it's redundant, but it's so true. The crisis is always opportunity. When you study history, you see that the people that find the opportunity in the crisis always win because everyone else is fearful and they pull back. But also what crisis does is it makes you try something new. Like, would I ever be, if someone said to me before, well, why don't you do pay-per-view or something like that? I'm like, it'll never work. I'm in a stadium. We got 15,000 people. You can't do that in your house. But the way, because I had to reach people, I built this system. And if you go to one of those digital programs, it'll blow your mind. People have life-changing experiences. And by the way, they're in every time zone. Yeah. So I've got people from 195 countries. And so I'm starting at 10 in the morning here in Palm Beach, and it's already midnight in Sydney, Australia. They'll go from midnight, 13 hours to 1 in the afternoon the next day. Same thing on the people in Europe. They're finishing at 4 or 5 in the morning. And we lose less than 2% of the people. And they're part of the show. We see them on the screen, they connect, we communicate. So there is always a way, and your job is to find that way. Everything in life that happens to you actually happens for you. If you're smart enough to dig in, there's an opportunity in it. There's nothing more important than that because we're all going to face significant and challenging times throughout our life.
That's good. And a shameless plug, if people haven't gone to one of your events, I mean, they're otherworldly. They got to go check them out. Like you said, it's unlike anything they'll ever go to. Okay, yes. Second question. What's the one thing that you did in your life that took you from being good to great?
I think the distinction of you get rewarded in public for what you practice in private intensely. So, as an opportunity, since I own a piece of them, but also I get to coach and work with some of the players, the Golden State Warriors, I'm working with some of the greatest players of all time. And Steph Curry is a perfect example. Steph, this is what people don't know about Steph. Steph goes out every single day and does not let a day go by where he's not making 500 shots, those crazy shots that he makes, making them, right? He's 168,000 shots a year is his average, 2.5 million shots in his 15-year career, so he can make 3,300 shots and be the greatest three-point shooter in history. 0.1% of the shots he'll ever take are actually in a game, but that's the ratio. And my level of preparation is the same. And when I made that decision very early on in my life of constantly finding a way to improve, like every time I finish, it could be 2 a.m, I sit down with my team, what worked, so we can repeat what worked. What could we do better? What could be improved? I've done that for 47 years. So it's pretty amazing seeing the impact of it.
That's cool. Well, on that note, third question, I know you're, huge proponent of change my perspective around this. Is there something you're doing this year to drive your own personal growth that's maybe new, different, or you're excited about?
Yes, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. I have a 50-year-old daughter, and I have a 3.5-year-old daughter. I have 5 kids and 5 grandkids. So nothing has done more for my personal development than having a little one at this stage of life. I'm 64, and to have her has been one of the greatest gifts of my life, and it makes me grow every day. And I get to be it's at this stage of life, I'm proud of how I've been as a father and a grandfather, but at this stage of life, it's so much more beautiful than any other stage. You're able to take in at a different level. And, my daughter speaks 3 languages right now, Chinese and Spanish and English. She's doing algebra right now. And she also hangs out and looks at the sky and paints, and she's got so much opportunity in her life. And just that is giving me more joy, and also gave me more challenges at times than anything I've experienced in a long time. So I think that's what I brought into my life to make another level of growth happen.
That's cool.
And then it's like big goals. Like I said, it's like, okay, we're going to provide 100 billion meals. And, I'm going to free 100,000 children who are in slavery. That type of stuff really excites the heck out of me.
When you sent me that picture that you had a baby, I thought you were joking at first, and then, but that is really cool. Okay, fourth question. What's not one of yours, but what is the one book that you've recommended most to other leaders or entrepreneurs?
I would say either Generations or The Fourth Turning, because you need to know where we are. I interviewed when I was working with I actually worked with President Clinton in the old days when he was president. And I went on the same day, I went across to the Speaker of the House, Gingrich. I worked with people on both sides of the aisle. Today, someone would shoot you in the head if you did that. The reason I mention it is both of them had a book on their desk called Generations. And I asked the president about it, and he said, oh my God, this is 500 years of Anglo-American history. You see the cycles of what shapes history. He goes, Tony, it's one of the incredible books I've ever read. And then it was the same book was on Gingrich's desk, who's a historian. So he's really into it as well. But they wrote a book called The Fourth Turning. I interviewed them in 1996 or 97. One of them's passed away. Now they have an updated one. What it shows you is that history is circular. You'll read the book and it'll describe something and you know what's happening right now. And then you'll see it was 80 years ago. And then they'll show you one from 160 years ago. It's a book you must read. It'll change your perspective. I highly encourage anybody to read it.
That's a great one. Okay, final question. Best piece of advice you've ever received?
Gosh, I've received so much good advice because I'm always... I would say Jim Rohn, my original personal development speaker. I remember I went to him and, I've had 4 fathers and they all left and we were always broke and no food and, some rough upbringing. But my fathers were good people. And so I remember going to Jim and I said, Jim, I said, you're such a brilliant man. I said, how come all 4 of my fathers are good men and we're always broke? And, they were, and he looked at me and he said, Tony, he goes, maybe a good way to answer this is that we're all equal as souls in this planet, but we're not equal in the marketplace. I said, so what does that mean? He said, well, if you go to work for McDonald's, and I forget what it was in those days, $8 an hour, whatever it was, he goes, and anyone can learn to do that job, in an hour. So it's not meant to be a long-term job. It's an entry job. And since you're adding so little value, you make very little. But I mentioned to him, I said, I think it's so unfair that teachers make, I think it was like $45,000 when I asked him, this is way decades ago. And I saw this hedge fund guy made, $1.2 billion. And he goes, Tony, the hedge fund guy you're describing produced a 38% return for his people. That's people's futures. That's their graduate, their universities. That's all these different groups. He said, someone else gave you a 5% return. That's decades difference in what those being done. He goes, those teachers are beautiful people, but most don't want to be paid on results. They want to be paid on how long they've been there. And he goes, I'm sure you had some great teachers, but were they all great? I said, well, no. But I said, I had a couple that were incredible. He goes, they're the beautiful exceptions. He goes, but they picked a job where they're not rewarded for performance. And he said, so my solution to you is simple. He goes, can people make twice as much money in the same amount of time? I said, sure. He goes, 10 times. And he eventually went to 100 times. And I said, yeah. He goes, how? They find a way to do more for others than anybody else in their industry. They find a way to add more value. And the way you do that is you have to develop the skills. You need to work harder on yourself than you do on your job. And so I never forgot that. And so all my companies, my obsession in all my companies is, how do we do more for others than anybody else in this industry? And I have multiple companies that are number one in the industry, different industries than my own, education industry. But in this one, we've dominated for, this is my 47th year doing this.
Yeah.
So it's like there's nobody in our class or size or our scope. And so I'm proud of that, but it's only because every time we do it, we find a way to make it better. And I think that's what we all need to do for our clients, is over deliver. That's what guarantees long-term success and, more importantly, long-term fulfillment as a soul, as a human being.
Awesome. Tony, well, thank you for adding so much massive value to our audience today. I should say, you kind of mentioned the events. You've got so many incredible ones: Unleash the Power, Date with Destiny, Business Mastery. What would be the best way for people to go follow everything you're doing?
Well, they can follow us on any of the social media, or they can go to tonyrobbins.com. I do one big event a year in the U.S. I do them all over the world, but in the U.S., and it's in November in New York. We'll have about 18,000 people. And then I do Date with Destiny once a year in December. So if you haven't seen Tony Robbins, I'm Not Your Guru on Netflix, give it a watch, and you'll probably want to come to Date with Destiny if you do, or to Unleash the Power Within. So thanks so much again, Cody.
Yeah, thank you, buddy. I appreciate everything you've done for us and for making the time today.
My pleasure.